Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just not used to talking anymore. I used to talk for a living and I would teach all day. But the point is, I tried to make a review of the Framing Britney movie and I wanted to research it. And when I attempted to research it, I just found so much information, down the rabbit hole because it touched on a lot of other issues as far as conspiracy theories. And I found a couple conspiracy theories regarding Britney Spears. And so I borrowed the title of one of her songs, I'm a Slave for You. And when we're talking about slavery, we usually think of American slavery or slavery in American history, that it's being this type of bondage based on race. But what I'm referring to is there's also different types of slavery or bondage, like white slavery, which has nothing to do with being white or skin color. It's actually sex slavery. And so it's a lot of information, and I'm probably going to have to do 2 or 3 parts as I continue to research and work on this. Okay, so with the popularity of the Free Britney online movement, the director Samantha Starks from the New York Times Framing Britney Hulu documentary, that was separate. So this was made independently and separate of that movement, according to Stark, the director, when she did an interview on Entertainment Tonight. Now, the Free Britney movement is that they are challenging, her fans are challenging Jamie or James Spears, her estranged father, having conservatorship, because for the last 12 years, he either has or potentially could have control over her daily activities, limit her phone calls and contact to the outside world, control or limit her access to her sons, and it definitely control her finances because she's essentially a corporation, a commodity, and she's making money. And how do you make money? You tour, you do residencies. Sitting at home, putting music out doesn't generate the same amount of wealth. So they want her performing, they want her touring, and that's where a lot of the money is being made. And they have, and they're the ones controlling that money. And so how can a person who's putting out 7 albums and on tour and doing a residency in Las Vegas, why would she need a conservatorship? Because traditionally, there are 2 types of conservatorships. I had to research this and find out. Now, my concern is when I'm hearing about this, it sounds like an abusive spouse, or it sounds like a cult to have somebody cut off, isolated from the world, and you're controlling who they can talk to and when they can talk, and you're controlling their money and their movement. That's very much what an abusive spouse would do, or what a cult would do, because these are red flags about control. And there's 2 types of conservatorship, and right now she is under the conservatorship that's through the Probate Court. And I looked into the definition of that one. That is a court-appointed guardian, which is her father. And so what happens is typically a family petitions the probate court to appoint a guardian or a protector for a ward. So Britney Spears would be the ward in this case. And that's because of an intellectual disability, like maybe in a slow adult, or an elderly person that has dementia or Alzheimer's, or is in a nursing home, or someone with severe physical disabilities that can't live alone. And you see a lot of abuse, and this is why there's child protective services, but this is why there's also adult protective services, because an elderly person or someone with intellectual and physical disabilities is very vulnerable and frequently abused and exploited by people around them. And so you see a lot of abuse with these kind of cases. The people that are trying to gain control over a ward, someone with intellectual physical disabilities or an elderly person. They're trying to gain control over them in order to access their finances. So that is actually very common to see this type of abuse or exploitation. Yes, it's someone with diminished capacity, someone who's in need of assistance. The second type is called a Lanterman-Petris Short Act, originated in California. Now, it seems like Britney Spears has also had this type of conservatorship because it's more commonly referred to as a 51-50 hold. So it's individuals' authority over a person with mental illness that they considered a harm to themselves or a harm to others, involuntarily treated on a 51-50 hold for psychic evaluations that can last up to 72 hours, 72-hour watch. And when you're arrested, you're allowed to make a phone call. You're allowed to call your lawyer. You have your Fifth Amendment right of due process. But by being placed on a 51-50 hold, like Britney Spears, you lose all credibility and you basically have no rights. And this can lead to long-term institutionalized and having a long-term indefinite conservatorship. And I looked into the whole history behind the Lanterman-Petris Short into mind control and how this has been very this paradigm, this model has been in place before, because I looked at mind control victims and psychiatric wards. So the 51-50 hold is named after the Welfare and Institutions Act. In 1967, in California, people with mental health issues or intellectual disabilities, like slow adults, they were living for lengthy, indefinite periods of time while being in. Now, this goes back, and I believe I made a video and someone reported it and took it down, but this was under Operation Paperclip, if you look that up, and that's when we were told in American history classes that after World War II and the Nuremberg trials, that Nazi war criminals were prosecuted. I've only later found out, they don't even teach this in grad school. You don't learn this when you're getting your MA in history or a PhD in history. But Operation Paperclip, the U.S. government, a certain alphabet agency that starts with a C that I cannot talk about, they actually employed Nazis. They gave them new identities, and that's how we got our NASA Space Administration, as far as our missile fuel technology. And that's also how we got our psychological warfare department under Mind Control, MK Ultra, Monarch. It's called Mind Control with a K in honor of Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in Auschwitz at the concentration, later became a death camp in Poland. So he was employed and he was working under assumed identity in California hospitals, running involuntary psych warfare experiments on, the patients there. It is very interesting because season 2 of American Horror Story actually talked about this, and I just found that story of predictive programming that was included. But that's not a conspiracy theory. It's now more publicly known about Operation Paperclip and Operation Monarch Butterfly. So those experiments were being done there. They went from the military bases to the psych ward to communes, like hippie communes, like the Grateful Dead, or cults like Manson family, Or then the U.S. government funded the Church of Satan for Anton LaVey, and they carried out these experiments there. And then you had Colonel Michael Aquino, who founded the NSA. He went from the Church of Satan to start his own cult called the Temple of Set. So there is a connection between conservatorships, long-term, short-term, and mind control victims. And we saw this recently also with Kanye West, because Kanye West kept talking a lot of truth, and he kept threatening to reveal things that he wasn't supposed to be talking about. He was ranting and raving at his concerts. And then he was whisked away, locked up in a psych ward, involuntarily given electric shock treatment, and then he reemerged with blonde hair. And when he came back with blonde hair, that was to tell the world and everybody involved that he's had his mind control programming readjusted, and he seemed a lot more docile. But that's what he was talking about, because for some reason they give you a new identity, an alter ego, and they usually bleach your hair blonde or they shave your hair. And that's also what Katy Perry did when she was struggling with her alter ego, Katy Perry versus Katherine Hudson. And she did the YouTube event where they were watching her around the clock for 4 days and brought in a team of psychiatrists. And she went from having her long, beautiful brunette hair to having a short blonde pixie cut. It was to show everyone that her mind control programming has been readjusted and we've got her back under control. That's why they emerged with blonde hair or shaped or short hair. They have a very drastic change. And so that's what we're looking at. Now, the reason that you would move from hospitals to Church of Satan cults, abusing these people, these children, these celebrities, they ritualistically abuse them, hurting them to the point where their mind, their psyche breaks and forms at least one other alter ego as a coping mechanism. And so it's called Over the Rainbow, Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, where you've hurt this person so bad that their mind is beginning to disassociate from reality and has gone over the rainbow. Or it's called Alice in Wonderland with a white rabbit, where it's down the rabbit hole and through the looking glass. And so that's why you see butterflies represent mind control. And you'll see mind control victims surrounded by butterflies to show transformation, with white rabbits, rabbit imagery, rainbows. So a lot of the times you can tell these things because their symbols are their downfall, because they have to be able to use these symbols, which is a type of lesser magic, and that's magic with a K, like Aleister Crowley magic, not magic tricks. So in 1967, California redefined who needed to be institutionalized. And so there was this effort to deinstitutionalize people and to save funding. So they put a lot of slow adults and mentally ill people suffering from schizophrenic who didn't have the resources, the means, the family. They couldn't cope. They couldn't take care of themselves. They couldn't get into housing. They couldn't work. And so they finally did it. They just put them all out on the street. And then once they did that, you had charities, NGOs, non-government organizations, these churches that swooped in and picked them up and moved them. This was in San Francisco. And so there was an immediate homeless crisis in the Bay Area. And that's where you have Jim Jones. And he comes in and he represented the People's Temple in San Francisco. And so he took in all of these people Mostly were African American, and they were living under his custody. And this is also O.J. Simpson's mother. She worked for Jim Jones, but she didn't go to Jonestown. And O.J. allegedly, and this is all allegedly, this is all what I've heard, what I studied, what I've seen, what I observed. It's all allegedly. So allegedly, O.J. Simpson, based on people observing him and writing about him, that he suffers from dissociative identity disorder, that he has a multiple personality. His alter is named Charlie. He has what's called Tin Man Wizard of Oz programming. And Charlie's the one that was responsible for his ex's, Nicole's, death. And that was all tied to a Colombian drug connection. But then if you don't know about Jonestown, so there was a congressman from California. A lot of people were concerned about their loved ones because suddenly they went to claim their loved ones and they disappeared, and they were now living in Guyana in South America, there in the West Indies. And so Congressman Leo Joseph Ryan, he was very vocal that he disliked this one alphabet agency that starts with a C, because he believes they should have been, just like JFK, he wanted to put them under control of Congress and put a checks and balance. JFK wanted to splinter them into a million pieces and put them under his thumb. And you saw how well that worked for John F. Kennedy. So he received complaints that people's loved ones were being held against their will, that they were hostages. And so he went down to Guyana to investigate what happened to these people and do a welfare check on them and to make sure they're not being held against their will by some type of nefarious government organization or some kind of kooky religious cult. And so it's called a black military op. And black military ops are they're covert, they're secret. The funding, even how they get their funding is a secret. They're not on the books, so there's no record of this. So he can't just be like, oh, he can't just call the agency and be like, hey, are you working with people in Guyana? You're holding nearly 1,000 people hostage. And so he had to go and look and see what was going on. So Jim Jones was working. He was under the guise of being a pastor. He was working on MK Ultra training, and he was trying to create these mostly black, because he wanted them to be African American so he could take them to Africa to fight in Angola. So they were going to be super soldiers, that they would be like these fearless and obedient mercenaries. And if you've seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, like that psychologically you want someone who is, who doesn't have any fear of oncoming or potential threats, that they would just be this super soldier that would fearlessly be and not have any of those sort of hang-ups about fighting in sort of guerrilla style tactics. And I think this was in the NATO forces. Of course, when he found out that Congressman Ryan was there and he was investigating them, he forced all of the members of his cult to drink red Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. That's where the term drinking the Kool-Aid means that you've been brainwashed into believing somebody's hype or something. And the ones that refused to drink it, ran and hid in the jungle, and that's where they got shot in the back and they got hunted down and killed. And 909 people died. And prior to 9/11, that was one of our largest incident of American civilians dying, not in a war, unlike the conflict at Pearl Harbor or a natural disaster. And then Congress Ryan was shot on the Guyana airstrip, so he was killed. He didn't make it out because they had to cover up what they were working on because it was top secret. So understanding conservatorships and mind control, both long-term and short-term. I'm going to discuss some of the history and background about Britney Spears. I was never a Britney Spears fan. I listened to rock, I listened to grunge, alternative, indie pop, so I don't listen to top 40 mainstream pop. And I had no idea that she was this talented, but regardless if you're a fan or not, it's definitely disturbing how the media and the industry, how they treated her as a female pop star and just in general as a child of God, that why she was treated this way. So she was originally born in Minco, Mississippi, the middle child of Brian. Her younger sister is 10 years younger, Jamie Lynn. So, born Barbara Jean on December 2nd, 1981, she moved to a small town in Kentwood, about 2,100 people, an hour from New Orleans. Her father allegedly is an alcoholic. There was a restraining order taken out against him. They later divorced. She competed in pageants, gymnastics. She originally auditioned for the Mickey Mouse Club at 8 years old, but they said she was too young. She then went on to Broadway, and this is what we see in the Hulu documentary, that Felicia Collada, which was a friend of the family, that she chaperoned Britney in New York City while she was working on Broadway, starring with Natalie Portman in a Broadway play called Ruthless. It was, I guess, a musical for about 2 years. And then she auditioned a second time for the Mickey Mouse Club, the new Mickey Mouse Club, and she got it. So she was there, only 10 years old, working along with Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, Ryan Gosling. And so now she's in the House of Mouse. So the contracts were considered exploitive. They were very one-sided. At 10 years old, she was working from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., so a full day, just like an adult. And they were only getting $185 a week. So I did the math, and that's about $5 an hour. Minimum wage at that time in 1989, minimum wage was $3.35, and she was earning $6.60. So it really wasn't that glamorous. So it was $5. So she made $5 an hour, and minimum wage in 1989 was $3.35. And if you adjust for inflation, that $5 would probably be about $6.60. So she really wasn't earning that much. In fact, her family had to fly out there from Louisiana to California and live there part of the time. And they were paying for her music, her dance and singing lessons, and they were actually going into debt now, trying to finance her career and make her a star. And this is after she had competed on Star Search and came in second. Now, I know some additional information. So it's hard to talk about Britney Spears starting out as a Mouseketeer and not talk about the demonic history of Disney. Now, Disney is a French name, D is Signy. So DISIGNY. Now, reading David McGowan's book, Programmed to Kill: The Politics of Serial Killers. This book. So, reading his book. Now, he died. He wrote that book, and he also wrote Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, the Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. Wrote this book. He was talking about an event that was being played out of, and he was live on YouTube giving a breakdown of an event about 10 years ago, and he was explaining how, showing you that there was a false flag and that it was more psychological warfare and what was really happening behind the scenes. Then on YouTube, someone popped up and said, in 6 months, you're going to have a fast-acting cancer and you're going to die. And sure enough, that's how he died. But he wrote about 3 books, and he didn't start out as a conspiracy theorist or a historian or anything. He was actually a drug counselor, and he was working in the 80s, and he saw a lot of crack in Black communities. And so if you want to find out who the real Rick Ross is, Ray Rick Ross and Iran Contra and American Made and Airport in Messina, Arkansas, well, that's who that is. So that's how he started out. But he talks about Walt Disney. And this is what he said. He doesn't name the name, but he said that Walt Disney descended from a male witch that was put to death in the Salem witch trials. Now, in Europe, they were burned at the stake. And heretics and witches were burned at the stake in Europe. So, like, Joan of Arc was falsely accused, even though that probably wasn't true. But here in the United States, we didn't burn our witches at the stake. We hung them. And when you go back and look, when a witch betrays his or her coven, they either burn you at the stake or hang you. And that's why, if you go back and look, Sharon Tate and her ex-boyfriend, Jay Sebring, of all the people there that died, Sharon and Jay have a noose around their necks to symbolize that they were hung. And that's because they betrayed their coven. Because they were all in a coven together with Roman Polanski. And Manson was hired to make like snuff films and child movies. And they did homemade sex tapes that she had to put out against her will for his friends. So, but then she betrayed the coven, and so that's when, after she died, they put a noose around her neck. Kind of, I don't know too many people that seems like kind of, overkill to, that she was already dead and a noose was hung around her neck. But so Disney is a descendant of the Salem witch trials. And that's why if you look in his logo, you see 3 6s, 666. And if you think about it, all of Disney's fairy tales feature orphan children. That maybe there's an abusive, evil step-parent, or maybe there's an uncle or aunt somewheres, but they don't have parents. Frozen, Cinderella, Bambi, Scrooge, McDuck, Rescuers, Lion King, Leo and Stitch, Fox and Hound, Snow White, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Nemo, Tarzan, Brother Bear. They're all orphans. They don't have parents. You don't have to ask your parents permission to do whatever you want to do with these children. Either that or they have an absentee parent. Parents aren't in the picture, like in Beauty and the Beast, Rapunzel, Dumbo, Pinocchio, Peter Pan, and Lost Boys. So that's interesting that you make all these movies for kids and the kids don't have parents. Also, if you go and there's the Disney 33 Club. There's a private club at Disney called 33. That's because that's in reference to him being a 33 degree Freemason. He's a high-ranking Illuminati Freemason. And that's generational, so whatever generation he was when he died, his son inherits that same ranking, or his daughter does, and but women aren't in the Freemason. They're in what's called the Star of the Eastern Order. It's a different group. There's a group for women, and Black people have the Bowls. Those are black. There's a Black Freemason group. So, but yeah, and then if you look at a map, and I've been looking for it and I can't find it, but I've seen it. There's a private club in that it uses the child lover logo. So on the map, and I think it was Disney World, not Disneyland, Disney World in Florida, it actually does incorporate a child lover logo. And these are the logos. It's not my opinion. It was actually the FBI who put out information saying pedophiles throughout the world use these logos. A boy, little boy lover logo, a little girl lover logo. And I remember, if you look at the Olsen twins, you clearly see kids and what they look like being abused. This is what happens to child stars. And I remember listening to Howard Stern. I used to listen to him, and Uncle Jesse from Full House, John Stamos, said he frequently took the Olsen twins alone without their parents on a number of trips to Disney World. So I got a creepy vibe from that, what was going on that Full House set. And if you look up sort of the dark side of Disney, there's a lot of clickbait videos about Disney theme parks. And one of the things it tells you is that there's a lot of secret hiding spots that you can for people watching or kid watching. And that a lot of kids go missing, a lot of them get hurt on rides, and maybe the parents are paid off, and then and you never really hear about these stories. Now, when Disney died on his deathbed, he was 65. His final words was asking for Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell at the time in 1966 was 14, and he was a child actor that spent a lot of time alone, buddying, palling around with a 65-year-old man. So that's Disney. That's the House of Mouse. This is also about Nickelodeon, which is another equally disgusting institution as far as grooming children. Now, allegedly, producer Dan Schneider, when he was 39 years old, he impregnated Britney's sister, Jamie Lynn Spears, and she was only 16. And that was while she was working on Zoe 101. She wanted to have the baby. She left the industry. She moved back to Louisiana, said the baby was her boyfriend's. But we continue to hear stories about Dan Schneider working with Amanda Bynes. And that's what Amanda Bynes was trying to tell people. That's who was abusing her. That's who abused her when she was a child actress. And if you look at photos, if you Google Dan Schneider, the former producer, I think it's only been recently that we've been able, that there was enough public pressure and exposure that he no longer works at Nickelodeon. But you can see a lot of inappropriate photos of him with girls on his lap, grabbing girls, hands on them, hands on their waist. And he worked on iCarly with Miranda Cosgrove, The Amanda Show, What I Like About You. There's also concerns about Drake and Josh in the Degrassi High series. So there's a lot of these TV shows because in the 1980s and 1990s, specifically in the 1980s is what I heard, the studios green-lit any TV show that was kid-centered or kid-oriented, because not only did you have the main cast, it required a lot of extras. So you had an excuse every week to bring in a number of extras. So different kids as in the background. So there's a reason for a whole new group of kids. And this is how, Spielberg discovered Heather O'Rourke. And if you Google, you can find a picture of Heather O'Rourke on one lap, on one of his legs, and Drew Barrymore sitting on the other, sitting in his lap. So, and then Heather O'Rourke went on to star in Poltergeist. There's also where Heather O'Rourke worked as the daughter of Fonz on the Happy Days, and she's there with Henry Winkler. Now, it was allegedly, the story is, this was also published on a website called Hollywood Days and Nights that it does blind items. So there was called a TV show called Rocky Road, like the ice cream. The children are orphans. They don't have parents, but they're running their parents' business, an ice cream shop on like a busy beachside boardwalk. And so Heather O'Rourke was going to come on for one episode, do a cameo. And the child actor, it was Devin Odessa, and she worked on Rocky Road. And so did Louis Arquette, the father of Patricia and Rosanna, and David Arquette's father. He was on that show. And so Heather O'Rourke was going to come in, and supposedly she died of intestinal stenosis and cardiac arrest and septic shock. But others believe that she was R-word to death. There was a rupture, a tear to her internal organs, that they did some damage to her because they hurt her so bad. And there was a lot of kids shows that use these symbols. Go back and look at Carissa Explains It All. Go back and look at Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or Saved by the Bell, and you'll see the boy lover, girl lover. I would say it's more child lover. They overuse. I think they basically use the boy lover spiral to represent any type of lover that represents pedophiles in general. But sometimes they do specify. If you look at the show, and you see this with Back to the Future Parts 1 and 2, Elijah Wood said one of the biggest problems in Hollywood growing up that he saw was pedophilia, that he would go to these clubs. They had like soda clubs where they weren't serving alcohol, but they let celebrity kids come, and then there would be male producers that wanted to party with kids, and there was a reason for that. And he's an extra, and he was on in the Spielberg project Back to the Future 2, and that's why Crispin Glover did not want to come back as Marty McFly. He wrote a letter. He refused for no amount of money was he going to come back, and he sued when Spielberg used his likeness because he did not want anything to do with Spielberg, because he saw in the sets, because when they're not shooting one scene, you have like a bedroom like set up somewhere is off, a set that's not used, and he saw what was going on with kids, and that's why he refused to be in the sequel, and he sued when they used his likeness, and he won. There was also the show Kids Incorporated, which starred Jennifer Love Hewitt and Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas and Mario Lopez. So Britney Spears is now 12. She's done the new Mouseketeers, the Mickey Mouse Club. And so her big breakout is at 15 when she signed to Jive Records. And this was so I was listening to grunge and alternative music, but the Spice Girls were popular. And so there was this bit of pop revival, but with Lou Pearlman, it was mostly boy bands. And they tried to put Britney in like a girl band called Innocence. And of course, these boy bands are manufactured. It's not like the Beatles where 4 people just meet each other and they're like, oh, I play bass, I play drums, let's start a band. It's a very manufactured image. And so she doesn't want to be in a girl group. And so in the late 90s and early aughts, she really dominated. And she came out at 15 with her big hit, Baby One More Time, and then Oops, I Did It Again in 1999. And the Baby One More Time cover art is so like sexually exploitative. It's very like suggestive because she's on her knees with her legs open just a little bit, smiling and looking up. And she's only 15. When I first saw her, I was at a bookstore. I was barely 20. She must have been about 17. And I saw her on the cover of Rolling Stone, and I'm like, this poor child. They're clearly exploiting her. It's the Lolita trope. Now, if you've seen, well, I've never read the book, but the book is actually supposedly about this Russian writer who was the victim of his uncle having relations with him. But in the book, he doesn't want to write about himself, so he wrote about a girl. And the Lolita trope is where we saw this in the film, the Stanley Kubrick version with Sally Lyons. And then they did a remake where you have Dominic Swain and Jeremy Irons. So the Lolita is very, she's a nymphomaniac sex addict, except she's only 15 or a young teenage girl. And she's seductive and manipulating, and it's her fault. It's her fault. She did this. She lured in these pedophiles. So, it's blaming the victim. And so I definitely saw this with Britney, and I can immediately see like this, like I could tell either Rolling Stone did it or her marketing or whoever's responsible for her, that they are exploiting this child's image, just like they did with Brooke Shields, just like they did with Mila Jovovich, just like they did with a lot of Hollywood actors and singers, that they were exploiting this in this over-sexualized image of this very little girl who probably just wants to sing songs for you. And of course, they're blaming the victim, and it's really easy to do when we're talking about, in a misogynistic, society that would blame women. So then I saw her a year later, I guess, or later that fall, and she's doing the Oops, I Did It Again. And so she's this barely legal jailbait fantasy. They have her in Catholic school uniform, that she's a good girl gone bad. But she's in control. She's dominating the hallways. And so it's this dichotomy. And she's showing her cleavage and her midriff and showing this flesh. But she's an ex-mouseketeer. She's a good girl next door. So I think when, and both male and female interviewers, when they interviewed her, or the media coverage, they, you know, they criticized her for being so sexually suggestive or provocative. And I think she tried to say, being at 15, 16, 17, that she was a virgin. She wasn't sexually active. She's not, you don't need to slut shame her because she's not a slut. And then they'd be like, so then the next interview, they're asking about her developing breast and, her body changing and, still going through those last stages of puberty and, gaining or losing baby weight. And then so she tries to say, I'm a good girl. I'm a virgin. I'm not like what you think, just because I wear wear a belly shirt doesn't mean, I'm a slut. So then they're like, okay, well, are you still a virgin? So now there's like a clock sort of over her head. And I saw this with the Olsen twins, and I saw this with Lindsay Lohan. There's basically this invisible clock, this countdown for when she's turning 18 or when she's losing her virginity. And it was just so incredibly disgusting how people treated her and how people talked to her. And they put her up on this pedestal, only to tear her down. And that's what I saw. And I did pop singers, but I saw that with Britney. And pulled up a couple of different sources. And so Samantha Stark, the director, the reason why she called it Framing Britney is because, one, you're seeing her life played out in frames, photos by paparazzi. And since then, there's been laws changed. And if those laws should have been changed after we lost Princess Diana in 1997, because it's not safe to drive. It's not safe for her to get behind the wheel and drive with the paparazzi attacking her. And if you believe that and you want to protect someone, then you need to stop buying those magazines. Don't buy US or People or whatever those magazines that pay paparazzis. If nobody's looking for these photos, then maybe they wouldn't be so desperate to, get these shots that are invasive and they don't respect people's privacy, because they really put her life in danger, attacking her and swarming her vehicle and having cameras flashing while she was trying to drive away. And especially with her children. And then they tried to parent shame her, and they tried to body shame her. And I'm not even a fan of her music, and this is so disgusting. So I can't imagine why fans would want to buy photos or look at photos online knowing what the paparazzi was putting her through, how the media was talking to her and treating her. The other reason why it's called Framing Britney is because obviously it's her being blamed and set up. But the director said that in 12 years, officially, publicly, she has not came out and stated that she wants to end her conservatorship with her father. She's signaled for help. She's left cryptic codes on Instagram for her followers that she's asking for help. But at the time of making that documentary, she did not publicly state that. However, the Free Britney movement is growing more popularity, and it's independent of this documentary. But the director also said that that she has a very tight circle, and that media cannot speak to her. You can give messages, but you have no idea if her publicity team, PR reps, if they're receiving those messages. She couldn't be interviewed. She can't go to court and talk about her situation in probate court. She can't participate in the conservatorship process. And I really think that they control access to her sons, because that's how you control a mother. And there's been NDAs and people in suing fans, but she said, "Hey, we're the New York Times, so they're willing to fight this if need be, just trying to get the documentary made. But it had to be done without her participation because no one's allowed to talk to her. And I've just seen how the media has treated her now. Back during those Oops, I Did It Again years, late 90s, early aughts, the former First Lady, Kendall Sabinsky-Ehrlich, which I point out in the documentary, she was the wife of the Maryland governor, Republican Robert E. Ehrlich. She was actually a county prosecutor and an assistant public defender. And they didn't explain that in the documentary, that she wasn't just, somebody's wife. And she was speaking at a DV, I can't say the words, but a DV event for, battered spouses. And she told the audience that if given the opportunity, she would shoot Britney Spears based on how sexualized her image was and what they thought of her. And so I guess she's a very polarizing figure because I didn't like her. I didn't like her music. I didn't like her image. But of course, what we saw of Britney was very binary. Britney's the good girl gone bad, former Mouseketeer, but Christina is the dirty girl. Or the breakup between Justin and Britney, and if you're on Justin's side when he's singing Crimea River and doing skits on NSL, Saturday Night Live. So sort of had this either on Team Britney or Team Christina or Team Justin. But they built her up to tear her down. And the media was very abusive. Perez Hilton pretty much made that bottom feeder, made his career off of her. And all the nasty, vitriolic, abusive things that he said about her career, her talent, her body. And I don't think he's really in a position to talk that way about this woman. And it was both male and female reporters. And then I remember Fred Durst came on Howard Stern a long time ago. This when back in these early, early aughts. And I guess after 1999, he's like, "Oh yeah," but he told about this experience with Britney, and he didn't even have to take his baseball cap off. And then it was listening to Justin publicly discuss it, and that she's this horrible person. She broke his heart. So in 2003, now this, if you look at, this is the incident with Wendy Williams, where she's wearing the Statue of Liberty outfit, and there's also an incident with Al Roker, where I think for Al Roker it was Holy Spirit. So when Diane Sawyer used the word weird, people believe that accidentally triggered her MK Ultra programming, because it can be done accidentally or through coercion or on purpose, that she can switch alters. And supposedly her alter, unless somebody knows more about Britney Spears, and supposedly her alter is called Mona Lisa. Just like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, and Nicki Minaj says a little boy lives inside of her named Roman and he does bad things, and Mariah Carey has Mimi. So they have these alters, and that's what they turn on when they want to perform. And so her trigger word is weird, according to conspiracy theories online. And they use things like starvation diets. So like the NXIVM cult with Alice Mack, those girls were being starved and they got to have 1,000 calories. Now Teddy Joe Mellencamp, all in, they only let those women have 500 to 800 calories, and they had to work out for an hour, do cardio. They abuse them, they isolate them, they deprive them of having outside contact, and so they have these handlers that control them. Now, remember there was a story about Paris Hilton, and she was looking for her Chihuahua, and in the 90s, early odds, you saw a lot of girls like Paris Hilton running around with these little kind of purse armpit dogs like Chihuahuas. And I heard allegedly what they do is they only allow you to have they allow you to have a pet. And that's your only source of comfort. And when you're bad, they take the pet away. And if you're really bad, they'll hurt the pet and you won't see it again. And that's when there was a story that Paris couldn't find where the dog was. And they're like, how dumb is she? I'm like, how does she not know where her dog is? But if you look at her left eye, that she has that one kind of wonky, kind of a lazy eye from MK Ultra programming. And she talked about that, being kidnapped and forcibly taken to those schools, and she was abused and people heard her. That's what she's talking about. She had handlers. And now she has to be on the road, flying internationally, making money, even though she has like a lot of money and she's still out there working. So also with MK Ultra, they say every 27 years there's Saturn returns, the Saturnalian Satan. It's theology, mythology. And so that's why a lot of people who have MK Ultra, they start having these breakdowns and they start having a real hard time at 27. And 27 has sort of an occult reference to Saturnalia. There's a lot of theories about shaving her head. Did she do it because she was forced to do that to humiliate her, or because they were readjusting her MK Ultra programming, just like they did with Katy Perry and Kanye West. I know that when Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, emerged, he was bald. That's when he made his deal with the devil for that double hit album, like calling it If It's Infinite Sadness. That album, the artwork, the song 33, the video, it's all about MK Ultra. Selling your soul in a Faustinian pack. You would sell your soul to the devil for a hit record. Of course, one theory is that she'd be pretty anymore. Sometimes girls gain weight. I was very thin, and it really helped gaining weight. Gain about 30 pounds, you get to have a little bit more anonymity. You cut your hair short. You look like a boy. You wear baggy clothes. It allows you to feel safer with the male gaze. Others claim that she did it so she wouldn't have to give a hair sample for a drug test. But, okay, the hair is still there. So anybody could get that hair sample from the hair that's being swept up after she shaved her head. Plus, your hair, look, you have body hair. And I know that's not as reliable, but I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I bet you could use body hair as a hair sample. So I don't believe that. I think that's more BS. The more I looked into this, the more I learned, and the more it covered so many different conspiracy theories. So one conspiracy theory is that her perfectly timed meltdowns and controversies and her iconic moments were all done to dominate the 24-hour news cycle. And so what was ever going on with Britney was scrolling at the bottom of CNN to distract us from the Bush 2 administration. So something unpopular that was going on, or law like the Patriot Act that was being pushed, or invading a country or bombing somebody. Well, that was all done during that time period. And so I'm going to have to cross-reference that event because I really want to know if that's true, because I've heard that's also true about Miley Cyrus, that they called it a thirst trap. I don't think that's what the Alphabet Agency would call it. I think it's called something else. And then I found out this information about the child lover logo. And so I'm going to include information about that. And I listed it. I'll put it in the description. This woman, Lou Taylor, was stalking her. And there's a thing called gang stalking in the world of MK Ultra. And she was stalking her and every member of her family. And somehow, even as much as she complained about this woman, she ended up employing her as part of her entourage. And Britney Spears Foundation uses both the boy and girl lover symbols. So somehow money is being funneled back to a group. And I'm not accusing Britney Spears, but I think somebody is using her and her foundation for something very nefarious. So, and I'll include more information, but what I remembered is that Lou Taylor's husband is a pastor at Calvary Church, and they have a mission, an outreach program for young girls. And so they claim that they're helping these girls with various issues, from eating disorders to unplanned pregnancies to sex trafficking. And what they were doing, and I guess what Britney Spears' money was funding, is these girls were involuntarily participating in demonic exorcisms, that they were casting out demonic spirits against these girls' will. And so they accused the girls of being possessed by the spirit of Jezebel because they did something to let that spirit take hold of their mind or their heart, or they were sexually acting out or misbehaving. And so then they carry out these, against the girls' will, they were carrying out these exorcisms. And I thought, well, that's pretty scary. And then that's what the symbol they're using. So I wanted to look into more into the conservatorship hybrid, because, follow the money, because somebody's got their hands in this woman's pocket. And I also wanted to research about these foundations and why they're using that logo and what they're really doing with her money. And I also wanted to look into if there's any truth to what was going on politically and what we should have been paying attention to in the news cycle under the Bush administration, and these iconic and controversial and iconic moments in her life and these meltdowns that she was having, if there's any truth to that. So, and that's going to be like part 2. And it just seems like there's so much here that's beyond the framing Britney documentary. And my heart goes out to this person as a survivor, because she's a child of God. Even if you don't like her music, it is really sick and disgusting what Hollywood does to these people, especially does, I guess, to women. So I'll try to come back next week with an update.